everybody, and thank you for coming. My name is Serena, and I work for the San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory. And we are an organization based in Milpitas, and we focus on protecting birds and their habitats, or the places where they live. So I'm very excited today to talk to you about why we study birds, how we study birds, and to do an activity where you can learn how we do this. So let's see. Why do we study birds? It's not just because they're cool and pretty like that yellow bird that we just saw. It's also because they're really important. So one reason is that they are part of the ecosystem. And an ecosystem is a place with all the living things in it. So it could be a forest with all of its animals and plants. And it's also all the things that these living things use or interact with. So it's also the water, the air, and the soil. So all of these things are part of the ecosystem, and birds are an important part of the ecosystem. So here's an example of a food chain. So food chain is how energy moves through the ecosystem. So we have plants that can get eaten by lots of different insects, and birds, many of them eat a lot of insects. So by eating insects, they help make sure that there aren't too many insects in the ecosystem eating all the plants. So that's really important. Now, birds can also be food for other animals, like snakes, like you can see here, or foxes, or lots of other animals. So that's also important because everything needs energy to survive. They need food. So birds can be food too. And here in this example, we also see that some birds, like eagles, hawks, or falcons, can be at the very top of the food chain. So birds can play multiple different roles in the ecosystem, and they're all very important because they help to keep balance in the ecosystem. And because birds are part of the ecosystem, they can tell us how healthy the environment is. So if, for example, we see an area where there are a lot of birds and a lot of different kinds of birds, and they're having lots of different babies, that means that the ecosystem could be healthy. It means that the birds have enough food to eat, they have enough food to feed their chicks, and they might also have clean water and places to live. So that could be a healthy ecosystem. But if we see a change, if there are fewer birds or if they aren't having as many babies, maybe that's telling us that there's something wrong with the ecosystem. Maybe there's pollution in the water, for example. And so that might be why we might be seeing fewer birds. So this is really important, not just for the birds, but also for us humans, because we also rely on the ecosystem. We need clean air and clean water. So by paying attention to birds, we can learn about the environment, which of course is important for all living things. So why do we focus on birds and not other animals? Well, birds are nice because they're everywhere. They're not just in our forests and wild areas, they're also in our cities and parks. So, you'll see them in your backyard if you have one. So they are everywhere and we can learn a lot about them. They're also pretty easy to see and hear compared to a lot of other animals. So that makes them easy to study compared to other things. So those are some reasons why we choose to focus on birds. So how do we study them? Well, here we can see that some people are looking at birds. So the person in the front is using a scope to look at birds, and the person in the back is using binoculars to look at birds. We can also listen for birds because they sing and they call. But sometimes we want to learn more about birds than what we can see or hear. And sometimes there are birds that don't sing loud or that are hard to see. So in those cases, we might do something called bird banding. And I'm going to tell you what bird banding is. So bird banding is where we put this little bracelet on the bird's leg. That's called a band. And this band is made of metal. It's very lightweight, so it doesn't affect the bird's health or its ability to fly. And importantly, it has a unique 9-digit number printed on the band. And so this specific bird has that band, and no other bird will have that number. And that's important because that tells us exactly who this bird is. What can we learn from birds that are banded? Well, when we have them in our hand, we can get a lot of different information about them, right? We can take measurements and see how big they are. We can see what colors they are and things like that. We can even tell what age they are a lot of times. But with the bands, those unique numbers can tell us a lot. If we catch this bird and we put this band on it, we can catch it again another year. And we know it's that same bird because it has the same number. And so that can tell us how long this bird is living. We've caught birds that are 9 years old or even older than that. So we can learn a lot about them that way. We can also see where they're going. So if we catch this bird here in the Bay Area and somebody in Alaska or Mexico catches this bird and they know it's the same bird because it has the same number, then we can see where this bird is going throughout the year and that it's traveling super long distances, which is amazing for a little bird. So we learn a lot about how birds migrate and where they go at different times of year. So we learn a lot from this process. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we do that. So first I'm going to show you some pictures. So this is how we catch birds. So what you see up here is what we call a mist net. And this is a type of net that's kind of like a wall, right? So birds will fly into the net and the net has some pockets. And so birds can get caught in the pockets. Now, this is not something that you can just do at home. Okay, so anytime we're catching birds, bird scientists catch birds, we are trained for months, if not years, to do it safely, to make sure that the birds don't get hurt. And you also need special permission to do it. So don't try to catch any birds at home. So birds will fly into the net. And you might wonder, well, why would they fly into a net? Well, they're not always easy to see. And you can see that here. We have a net set up, but in this light and in this environment, it's pretty hard to see that net. Like the netting is very thin. So it pretty much disappears. And even people can run into it sometimes if we don't know it's there. So yeah, it's how we catch a lot of our birds. So this is a picture of a bird that is caught in the net. And here you can see how thin those threads are. And this might look a little bit scary for the bird, but the people who study them are banders, is what we call them. They are trained for a long time, so they know how to take the bird out safely and quickly so the bird doesn't get hurt. So this is a bird that is just getting almost out of the net. So it's just grasping on with its foot. And we're holding the bird in this way. And this also might look scary for the bird, but this is actually a very safe way to do it. And again, everybody who handles the birds are doing it safely and they're not hurting the bird. So what happens after we catch the bird? Well, we have to transport it over to where we're going to band it. And sometimes we catch a lot of birds at once. So what we do is we put the birds in an individual cloth bag. So each one of these bags has one bird in it. And it takes some time to actually take the information from the bird, right? We have to take some time to band it. So these birds are just waiting their turn. And being in the bag helps them calm down because they can't see everything that's happening to them. And it just keeps them safe until we're ready to process them. So this is what bands look like. And I have some here to show you today, as well as other tools that we use. But first I'm going to show you these pictures so that you can get a better look at them and so that you can see what they look like when they're actually on birds, because I don't have a real bird with me. So this is what the bands look like. Again, they're made of metal, they're very lightweight, and you can see that there are different sizes here. So we have big bands for things like ducks and geese, and we have little bands for little birds, which is most of what we catch. So most of the birds we catch are pretty small. You can see that they all have numbers on them, and there are a lot of different kinds. So this is what it ends up looking like on a bird's leg. That's the band there. And you can see that it's snug around the leg. It's not too tight. It's not too loose. And the way we do that is we first have to measure which band we need. So we have to measure the bird's leg to see which size fits them the best. So we have this tool here, which I will show you in a bit. And yeah, we just want to make sure that the band is going to be on there tight and safe, but not too tight. So it's got to be the perfect size. Now the bands come closed. So the first thing we have to do is open it up. And we use this tool called a banding plier to do that. So what we do is we put the band, on this rod here, and then we open the pliers to open the band so that it looks like this. And then we put it in these holes at the top of the pliers so that we can hold the band. And then we just loop that over the bird's leg and tighten it. And that's it. And we just make sure that it's nice and tight, there's no gaps, and it's not going to hurt the bird. Now, after we band the bird, we can take a lot of other information from it too. We can take measurements. So in this example here, the bird is having its tail measured. We're saying how long is its tail. We just use a little ruler for that. And in the background, you see all this writing here? That's the data sheet. So we're recording all this information about every single bird in this sheet. Well, what else can we get from birds? We can figure out how much they weigh. And the way we do that is we actually just put them in a little medicine bottle. And they stay very still when they're in that medicine bottle. And we put it on a scale and weigh it. And it just takes a few seconds, and then we gently take the bird out. And yeah, it's kind of funny how calm the birds are when they're in the bottle, but that's how we weigh them. And then after we're done, we go ahead and release the bird back into the environment, not too long or not too far from where we caught it. And so, you know, the bird is healthy, it's safe, and it's back in its environment, and it's probably a little confused at what just happened to it. It's kind of like an alien abduction. So now I am going to show you what some of those tools look like in real life in my hands. So I am going to stop sharing the screen so that you can see me a little bit better. Hopefully you're seeing the main screen is me so that you can see all the tools well. So I don't have a real bird. So I'm going to use this as my bird model. Okay. And let's say we've just taken this bird out of the net. So I'm holding the bird very gently. And the first thing I have to do is put it in our bag. And this is what we use to transport the bird again. And usually when this is happening, we keep our voices very low so that we're not startling the bird too much. And then when we're ready to process it, to actually band it, we just gently take the bird out and you gently hold it. And then we're gonna band it. So if you remember, the first thing we have to do is figure out what band size it needs. So that's where this tool comes in. If you remember seeing that picture, we just measure the bird's leg by putting its leg near these little dips in this tool. And that's how we figure out what's the right band size. And so if you recall, these are the bands. This is what they look like in real life. So we have some of these really big bands here for our bigger birds. And then we have really small bands. Look at how small they are for smaller birds' legs. And again, all of these have a unique number on them. And as you can imagine, the smallest ones have really tiny numbers, so they can be hard to read sometimes. So what we use is this tool. This is called a head magnifier. So we just put it on our head, and then this part is a magnifying glass. And so that helps me read the band numbers a lot more clearly. And so this also, if it was fitted on my head correctly, I could use it, I could have both hands free to handle the bird safely. So this is something that we can use to help read those band numbers. Now that you've seen the bands, I'm gonna show you what the banding pliers look like how we open it. Now, again, so you see that a lot of those bands are really small. So instead, I'm gonna use this bird leg to show you what it looks like to band it. And this is gonna be my pretend band, just this little green donut. So here are my banding pliers. So here's that rod again. That's where I slip the band over. So I'm gonna put that through there. Let's see if this works. I'm gonna open it. There you go. And now it's an open band. And then the way we put it on the bird is first we put it in one of these holes to hold the band, just like that. And then we have our bird's leg. So we're gonna slip it over the bird's leg. And then I'm gonna just tighten it. So now you see that it is tightened around this fake bird's leg and it's banded. All right, so now we have banded the bird. We've recorded that band number so we know exactly who has that band. And what do we want to do next? So let's go back to our bird model. We can take measurements, remember? So here I have a ruler and I can use that to measure the bird's tail, for example. I can also measure the bird's wing, how long its wings are. Or I can measure how big its bill is, how long it is. So those are all things that are examples of what we can find out from birds. And then, if you remember, we have to weigh the birds too. We want to know how much they weigh. So here are my medicine bottles. We have different sizes for different size birds, so really tiny ones and bigger ones. So for my model bird here, I'm going to use this size. And remember, I just gently place it in to the bottle and I put it on a scale and take the weight. And that's how we weigh birds. And then gently take it out. And once I'm done getting all the information I want from the bird, I take it outside near some nice vegetation, somewhere where it feels safe. And I put it on my hand, and sometimes it might fly free right away. Other times it takes a second. It'll just sit there on the hand for a few seconds before it realizes it can fly away and be free. So that's how we band birds. So now we can go ahead and start our activity if you would like. So hopefully you all have something that you can use to tie around your wrist. So I am going to use a pipe cleaner, but if you have anything like a ribbon or thread, something that you can tie around your wrist easily, then that would work really well as well. And this activity is for you to practice how to band yourselves or your family members. And you can also collect data from those people. So I have, yes, again, my pipe cleaner. And then for my bands, I'm gonna use beads. I'm gonna use 4 beads. I have 4 different colors, but as long as you have more than 2, that should be okay. And I don't know if people need a second to grab their materials, but I'm also happy to answer any questions that come into the chat as well in the meanwhile. Yeah. Do we think we're ready to start our activity? Does everyone have something to tie around their wrist? All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So we're gonna use beads and, in my case, a pipe cleaner. So all we do, and you can do this to maybe your family members, you can have a parent help you if you need. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pick 4 colors of beads, and I'm just gonna loop them through the pipe cleaner. And it can be in any order you want, that's totally up to you, but what you wanna make sure is that if you are doing this with multiple people, that each person uses a different color combination or a different order of colors, because you want it to be unique for you, right? That's how we ban birds. We need a unique number to identify the individual person or the individual bird. So that's what we're doing here today. So my combination, I guess going from left to right, is this gonna be left for you? Anyway, it's gonna be purple, yellow, green, and blue. So that's the data I'm gonna record for myself. And the way that I'm gonna do it is I'm gonna use the first letter of each color. So P, Y, G, B. And if you have colors that start with the same letter, so for example, blue and black, then you can just assign a different letter to one of those. So blue can still be B, and black can be K instead, for example. So that's something that you can do pretty easily. So now, once I have decided which colors I want on here, I'm just gonna tie it around my wrist. And this is something that you can do yourself or that you can get a parent to help with. So I'm just gonna twist this around my wrist, and you can either trim off the extra, or what I'm gonna do is just fold it back up and tie it around so that there's not too much extra just hanging out. So there we go. That is my bird band, but for people. So what we would normally do now is record that data. So what I would do is put my name probably, and also that color combination using those first letters, P, Y, B, K. So if I have a paper, or I can type it, either into the chat or onto a document or on my phone. And then after that, I can figure out, well, what data do I want to collect? So there are some things that are probably really easy to collect data for. So for example, hair color, that's something that I can just observe and write down. So for me, it would be black. And in addition to that, there are some other things that maybe we can measure if we have a ruler or a measuring tape. So that could be things like hair length, or maybe height if you have one that's tall enough. Or you can also ask the person, right? So I can also ask about the person's age or their favorite color even. And that's all data that we can record. So say you have all that data recorded somewhere, and then let's say you kept these bands on, and in about 3 months or a year from now, you all still had these bands on. What you could do is collect all that data again. And we know from the band colors, if nobody else has that band color, we know it's you if you keep that on. So we can see, has your hair color changed or has it stayed the same? Has your height changed? Have you grown? Or, maybe some people have shrunk, who knows? Maybe your hair grew, especially now since it's a little hard to get a haircut. So those are all data that we can get. So we're seeing how things change over time. And again, that's what we do with birds. So let me go ahead and show you that actually what we're doing here is very similar to what we're doing with real birds too, with bands. So let me go back. So this is the bird release. Now it's always fun to see that. So this is actually a method of color banding, which is another type of banding that we do. Now, these birds also get those bands that have those unique numbers on them. But what's also special about these is that you see that they have 4 different color bands on the legs. And the reason we do this is that these birds are a special type of bird that we're really interested in learning about. These are called snowy plovers. They are here in the Bay Area, but they are threatened, which means that there aren't that many of them left. So we put these color bands on them so that we can see them from really far away, and we'll be able to identify each individual bird. That way we don't have to catch them again to read their number. So this is a great way for us to see that. And what happens is we catch these birds as babies, as little nests, as little chicks after they've hatched out of their eggs. And we put the color bands on them. So this one has this yellow, blue, black, and orange. And notice this bird has those same colors, yellow, blue, black, and orange. That means it's the same bird. So this little baby that we caught was seen again a year later. So we know that he survived and he became an adult, and we can see where he went as well. He was caught in a different location than where he was originally banded. So we can see that he moved around. So that's really cool. That's something that's really important for us to understand about these birds. So as you can see, it's a little bit similar to what we did with the banding for ourselves, the 4 different colors to indicate every individual. And so you can see here that by performing bird banding and also using color bands, we can learn a lot about the birds that we have here. And we can also use that information to help understand them and protect them. So with that, I think I can take any questions that people have. Or, if you need more time to do the activity, that's great too. You're welcome to add your data into the chat window if you want. But yeah.
Well, we had a couple questions already.
Mm-hmm.
We had someone who wanted to know what kind of birds can swim in the water for a long time.
Oh yeah, we have a lot of birds that can swim in the water. So some things that you're probably gonna see include ducks. They can stay in the water for a long time. And we have a lot of species of ducks here. So there are a lot of those. Mallards are probably the ones that you're gonna see the most, but there are a ton of species. So they all look a little bit different. For example, there's one called a shoveler, and that has a really thick, long bill, and that's how it gets its name. It uses that bill to kind of shovel in the mud. So those are all birds that stay in the water for a while. A lot of gulls, of course, are out in the water a lot too. You also see them out of the water, but a lot of them do stay out on the water. We have, let's see, there are things called murrelets, which are really cool. They're actually an endangered species, the marbled murrelet, and they stay out on the water their entire lives. So they're almost never on land, except they nest actually in old growth redwood trees. So they need really big old trees to have their babies. And so that's one of the reasons why they're actually endangered, because they have fewer places now to build those nests and lay their eggs. So a lot of groups here in the Bay Area do work to protect that habitat for them. But otherwise, they are out flying out on the water or sitting on the ocean the whole time. So lots of birds out on the water.
Great. We had another question. Someone else wanted to know, how do you know what bird species of bird it is? So how do you identify the birds that you find?
Well, that's a great question. It takes a lot of practice, but we have bird guides. And that's one of the ways that we help, or I should say that we learn to identify different species. And actually, one good way too, if you don't have a book as a bird guide, is there are apps as well. So if you have trouble identifying a bird, you can check out this app called Merlin. And I can actually unshare my screen so that you can see it better. Give me 1 second. So there's this app called Merlin, and it's put out by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And they do so much work with birds. But that's a great way to kind of figure out what birds you're seeing, because you can enter a lot of information about the bird and they'll help you figure out what it could be. Or you can even upload a picture and it can help try to identify it from that too. You can also see what birds are in the area during this time of year. So that helps a lot to help figure out what species you're looking at.
And if you don't have a phone or you don't want to download an app, you can always find some good old-fashioned books from the library. So if anyone wants some help with that, I can send out maybe some links to that after the program. And we may also have some ebooks too, if you don't want to have to carry around a physical book. So we had a couple other questions. Someone wanted to know, when you weigh the bird, does the medicine bottle make a difference?
Yes, that's a great question. So what we do actually is we take a tare weight of the medicine bottle. So basically what we do is when we have the bird in the bottle and we weigh it, we take that number down and then we can weigh just the bottle by itself and just subtract that weight. So we'll know exactly how much the bird by itself weighs.
I think that's all the questions I've seen in the chat so far, but I did see a raised hand briefly and then it went away. So if that person still has a question, if they want to raise their hand, or if anyone else has a question, if you want to raise your hand, there's a little button down at the bottom of your screen that can show you how to do that. Or if you want to go ahead and type your question in the chat, then we can take some more questions from there.
Oh, I see somebody's hand up in their video. Yeah, so actually every bird sounds different. So you can figure out exactly what you're hearing if you can learn to bird by ear. There are some people who are really good at that. I am not one of them, but yeah, every bird sounds different. So in that app I showed you in Merlin, or also online, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has recordings of bird calls, bird songs, bird chirps. Those are all ways where you can listen to what different birds sound like. And there's also, I think, another app called BirdNet, where you can actually record the bird and it'll try to identify it for you too. So it's something that just takes a little bit of practice and you have to look up, you have to just kind of learn what they sound like if you want to memorize them and be able to identify what they are based on their songs or their chirps.
All right, looks like we've got another raised hand in the video.
And I'll add that normally what we would do if it wasn't a pandemic, we would actually bring groups out to our banding station in Milpitas so that you can see how we band birds in real life. Unfortunately, we can't do that right now, just for safety reasons, but hopefully as things get better, we'll be able to bring people out there again. So you might have an opportunity in the future with the largest bird in the world. Right now, it's the ostrich. That would be the heaviest bird, certainly. Ostriches are in Africa, and you're probably familiar with them, but they are super big. They have big, thick legs for running, and they're so big that they can't really fly. So they have very powerful legs to run and to protect themselves. There are some birds that have super long wingspans. So that's how long their wing is from tip to tip. So things like albatrosses, which live out on the sea as well, so they spend a lot of time on the water, they have wingspans, that are like 12 feet long, if you can imagine that. And they need those really long wings so that they can stay afloat in the air above the water. and they don't have to use too much energy flapping their wings. So there are some different ways to measure how big a bird is, but those would be the two that I would say. So longest wingspan and just overall biggest, heaviest bird.
I have a question for you. Not sure if you'll have information about this, but I saw something about a bird art contest. Is that something that you might be able to share some information about?
Yeah, so every year we've been doing a kids bird art contest. And it's probably going to look slightly different this year. But basically what we do is we have kids of different age groups submit art of their birds. So we want it to look like a nature journal entry. So what you do is you want to go outside and just look at birds, take note of some things that you're seeing. What are they doing? Where are they? And you write down the date, you make a sketch of the bird, maybe color it in, and just make any notes that you observe. Is it in a tree? Is it feeding some chicks maybe? Is it dipping itself in the water? Those are all different types of observations. So what we want to see is that you are taking some time to observe the bird. And so you can submit those to us, and those are due October 3rd. So we'd be happy to send you some information about that you can share with everybody.
Great. We also have someone who wants to know, what is the fastest bird?
Ooh, the fastest bird. So the fastest bird is the peregrine falcon. And that is a bird of prey. It hunts other birds, so it needs to move really fast. So what it can do is it can fly up really, really, really high, and then does this dive. And as it's diving for another bird, it can reach up to 200 miles an hour. So that's super fast.
And we have someone in the chat who says they would like to ask a question.
What kind of birds spread disease? Oh, well, that's a great question. So, of course, lots of wild animals can spread diseases because, they might have parasites. So little other critters living in their feathers and or near their skin. So those can sometimes jump to other people or other birds, and that's how some diseases get spread. Other things like avian flu, for example, or West Nile virus, those are some things that have also been known to spread among birds. So most of the time, those are going to be usually a lot of the bigger birds like crows and jays. Like if you see a sick one, try not to touch it. But generally, you shouldn't be trying to touch wild birds in general, right? Just for their safety and for yours. But usually most of the time, you don't get too much of that disease spread as long as the ecosystem is healthy too. And there aren't too many birds in an area. So sometimes when there's a bird feeder, a lot of birds gather to that area. And a lot of times that's safe. That's great for the birds. But sometimes people will start to notice that a lot of those birds are starting to lose their feathers, or they have some weird growths on them. And in that case, it's probably because there is a disease spreading among them. So you would want to take down those bird feeders for a while and let them spread out some more so they're not spreading so much of this disease among each other. So yeah, a lot of different birds can spread diseases, but not too many of them are going to be harmful to us. But you still don't want to go around picking up dead and sick birds if you can. You can leave that to a wildlife rehab specialist.
And we have a bit of a follow-up question in the chat. Someone wants to know, what kind of diseases are common for birds and could spread to people?
Yeah, so the ones that I mentioned, avian flu was transmitted from, I think, chickens mostly to people a little while back. And West Nile virus as well is something that has been spread from corvids, so things like crows and jays, to people. Usually that's not too big of an issue here, but again, just make sure you don't try to handle anything that could be sick if you can.
Do you put tracker devices on birds to know where they have been?
That is a great question. So we here at SFBBO don't do that too much, but we have had scientists come and do that actually. There are people who do that all over the place. So a few years ago at our banding station, we had somebody come in and put trackers on a bird called a Swainson's, or a hermit thrush actually. That's a brown bird with spots on its chest, and it has a reddish tail. And she put these tracker devices on them to see where they're going. So she banded and put them on at our station in Milpitas. And she also went up to Point Reyes, where they also have a banding station up there. And she put those tracker devices on those birds. And what she found was that these birds actually go to slightly different places. So even though they aren't here, or they aren't too far apart from each other here, they actually do use different migration routes. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, we can learn a lot from putting tracker devices on birds. A lot of people do that.
All right, well, if there aren't any more questions, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, and then I've got just a little bit of more information for folks after that. So I'm going to stop the recording now.